Hey gang, Mark Zona, and you know, an interesting question I get a lot, and we've actually taped a lot of shows, Zona shows, some Pro Team Journal shows in the past, is 3 lures for cold water fishing. And I think, number one, before we get to those 3 lures, is growing up where I grew up, you know, kind of in the Midwest, there's a misconception of cold water. Like 50-degree water is cold water, but to a bass, it doesn't put them in what I would say wintertime mode. Cold water is 35 degrees to me to 42 degrees. And here's one thing that's also interesting about cold water bass. Some of the biggest ones that I've caught in my lifetime, I've caught in that 38 to 40 degree water. But when I talk about lures for really cold water bass, I want things that are not intrusive, that are subtle, that I can basically slow down to the metabolism that the bass are in. Number one, hands down, and I've shot so many shows with this, is a 3.25 Rage swimmer. It's funny because a lot of the friends that I hang out with, whether it's smallmouth fishing or largemouth fishing, to me, that's like the wacky rig of cold water, if that makes sense. You throw a wacky rig, ocho, to get bites. That dude right there generates so many bites. You're able to, number one, you could slow it way down as far as speed goes. You can also fish it like a bottom bouncing bait. And what's interesting is when I go into the next lure, you're gonna see a common theme really between the 3 lures. So a 3.25 Rage swimmer, man, just keep your colors natural. That's gonna be really across the board on the next 2 baits that I talk about. The next bait, hands down, bar none, a Baby Z2. Again, it's a bite getter, and it also catches big ones. The one thing that I'll do different on that Baby Z2 is I won't drop shot it in really, really, really cold water, because actually when you fish a Baby Z2 on a drop shot, the bait gets a lot of action with the elastic technology. What I'll do is I'll put that on a Ned rig head to where, again, it's very, very subtle and I can slow it down. The third bait, standard 2.75 inch coffee tube. What's interesting, it's a lot smaller profile than a 3.5 inch coffee tube. And I've started fishing this little dude a lot more the last 2 or 3 years, especially in cold water. So you're looking at a 3.25 Rage swimmer, you're looking at a Baby Z2 and a 2.75 coffee tube. And the interesting thing about all 3 of those, number one, you'll notice a very, very small profile. And I believe also these are bite getters. And I think a lot of the forage in cold water, whether it's emerald shiners, really small bluegill, really small shad, all of these baits mimic that size, that profile of forage. And the other thing is I use the same rod for all 3 lures. And that's a Mark Zona Signature Series Lose all-purpose, a 7-foot all-purpose rod. And the reason why I use that 7-foot rod, of the 4 different models, Zona model rods from Lose, it really has the softest tip on it to where I'm able to just, look, I'm not doing a home run hook set. You just kind of ease into them, and that tip absorbs a lot of that. Because when I'm fishing in cold water, one thing I didn't talk about, you're looking at this setup right here, is I'll do a lot of 15-pound braided line to a 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. And really the last thing I'm gonna tell you about cold water fishing, a lot of the lakes that I fish are very, very, very clear. And what I look for, the areas I look for, are the last live vegetation. And generally, the last live vegetation ranges in that 15 to 22 feet of water. And what's cool about that is that last live vegetation, look, that grass that's up there, you know, where we're skipping boat docks and flipping in the summertime, that stuff dies off. But there's always a last outer line of vegetation. And what that does, it brings forage and it brings bass. And generally, in cold water, 35 to 40 degrees of water, when you catch one, 99% of the time, there are a lot more around. When bass get to their wintering areas, like I said, the last live vegetation is what I look for. This is a big thing. Remember where you caught one, because generally he has a heck of a lot of buddies near him.